Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, from wherever you are. We will start shortly, just waiting for the instructor for the day to just join us. He said he'll be late by about 5 minutes, but he should be here shortly, and then we will start. In case there's any questions or you need clarity with anything, please just post on the chat. Feel free to also interact, share where you're joining us from as well, as we wait for him to join. For those that are joining us, welcome. We will start shortly. We're just waiting for the instructor to join. He said he's running a bit late, but he's going to join shortly. Then we'll start. Feel free to post on the chat. Since we have someone from South Africa, feel free to post on the chat where you're joining us from. Also, if you can post on when you're sitting for the exam as well, that would be great. We do this so that you can get a study buddy, or at least people that are sitting for the exam at the same time as you, so that you encourage each other. Hi, Robert. Can you hear me? Hi, Robert. Can you hear me? If you're speaking, you're on mute. For those that are joining us, we are going to start shortly. Our instructor just joined. We should be starting shortly from now. Robert, your mic seems to be open now. You just need to unmute it from your end. Okay. Just give it a moment and then we should be starting soon. Right. Can everyone hear me? Just want to confirm that maybe I'm speaking to myself. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. This is Robert.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Okay.
Yeah, so I hope you are able to see my screen.
Yes, I'm able to see your screen. Okay. All right then. Thanks for joining, Robert. I was wondering for a moment why I couldn't hear you, but I'm glad I can hear you and I'm audible. Um, uh, I can see your screen as well, so maybe we should now start. Just wanted to lay some ground rules that if you have any question on the presentation for today, on any of the topics that Robert is going to share, please post on the chat. We'll have a moment where you'll be able to raise your hand and be able to ask questions, and Robert will be able to take these questions as we proceed. So feel free to interact, feel free to ask questions, participate when we'll be reviewing the PMP questions as well, and just let's interact to make it a very interactive session. So thank you and welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much. A quick test. I just want to be sure you can even see how I move the screen. Yeah. Can you see that? Can you see the movement
Yes.
of the slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very
Yes.
much. So good evening, good afternoon, everyone from wherever you are. Thank you very much, Nelson, for the opportunity to provide support to our candidates. I believe by the fact that they are here, they are committed, of course, and we wish you all the best. Okay, so we start off with a few things. First of all, apologies, I'm late. There was some sort of lightning and the internet was kind of unstable. So I wanted to switch to some reliable source so that we don't get disruptions. Okay, the exam prep, as you prepare for your exam, I always say, read the course materials to understand, not to cram. You should be able to contextualize what you're reading and relate. That's very important because the course content is massive. It's a lot of information that we give you during the trainings, and you can't memorize it. And that's not the objective, okay? So you have got to contextualize it, be able to understand it, and that way you'll be better prepared for the exam, and not just the exam, but even to go on and apply the knowledge that you get from your learning. Quick reminder, The exam, as you might be aware, is based on the exam content outline, which covers the three domains. So you be sure to have a balanced understanding of the three domains. If you pass two and on the other one you're very poor, you might not get the certificate. Okay. Always know that the best so far, from my viewpoint, the best practice questions are in the study hall. They tease you. As you review the answers, you get to understand the techniques. You learn a lot. You master the concepts. You see how the questions are phrased. And if you give it time, you should be okay. Lastly, be sure to balance your understanding from the agile approach, waterfall, and should be able to tell the difference, and also to know when it's a hybrid. So today's revision session touches on three tasks. The first two tasks are in the process domain, of course, which makes up a bigger percentage for the current exam content outline. Task number 11, integrating project planning activities. Task number 17 is about planning and managing project or phase closure or transition. And then the third task that we'll be looking at is planning and managing project compliance. Okay, there's a justification, whether for the exam or for practice, for each one of these tasks. They are key. I'm happy. This is what I was assigned. And as you must have seen on your invites, this is what we'll be covering. And we go straight to the first task. Right, so we're looking at integrating project planning activities. So what does that mean? It means actually bringing together the project planning activities so that they are in sync. So as you plan for the project, you understand that, there has got to be alignment because it's one project. Now, it all begins with determining the critical information that you need for planning, and integration starts early. Okay, so you start by identifying the kind of information that you need for planning, and of course, it all comes from what I like calling the pre-project work, which is when you have a business case developed that leads to the initiation of the project. Okay, so you need a business case to start, to have a charter, project charter, or have the project approved. And then, of course, understanding the stakeholder needs, etc., any constraints within your environment, within your team, and the key assumptions. Assumptions. Of course, constraints constrain you, okay? They limit you to working in certain ways, in achieving certain things and having difficulty in getting things done, and so on and so forth. The constraints could be within your environment, could be to do with the policies, could be to do with regulations, and so on and so forth. While the assumptions are conditions that are considered to be true, if we are to go ahead with what we plan to do. So in other words, anything that you call a plan is premised on a number of assumptions. We assume that the funding will be availed on time. We assume the assumption is that the board will actually approve the charter or the project within 2 weeks, okay, or in the next board meeting. The assumption is that we will have the right skills on our teams. The assumption is that we'll get ABCD. So those are assumptions. That's critical information that you need to pick in your environment before you start thinking of planning. So you plan using assumptions, understanding the constraints, understanding the reason why the justification for the project. That's critical information. It ensures that planning is based on relevant and complete inputs. Next, you now correct and analyze that data. Now the data is about stakeholder requirements. Remember, when we're talking about when we are defining the scope of a project, we go to the stakeholders to understand the product requirements, to understand the project requirements, to understand the quality requirements, and therefore, understanding those requirements gives us a sense of what is expected. Now, that's good, but it needs to be complete. You need to understand the conditions, the external conditions. You remember the EFs, so the market conditions. So you need to understand the EFs for the environment in which you'll be operating in, whether they are internal EFs or external EFs. Internal EFs, like, the culture of the organization, because that's going to have an impact on your planning. Okay, about the organizational structure, the organizational structures in the organization, the governance systems in the organization. All those are factors that you have no control over, but which could affect your project, and they will influence how you're going to go about your project. In other words, they will affect your planning. Next, you talk about the OPS, the organizational policies, processes, tools that are used, etc. That's very important, because when you're planning, you need to understand the tools that you use. You need to understand policies that you have to comply with. You need to understand the agreeable, the preferred processes and systems, and so on and so forth. Why do we do all of that? It's because we want to guide our planning, so that we have a realistic plan, or realistic plans for that matter. Okay, and therefore assessing the EFs, the OPS, understanding the requirements, that's key. That's critical to making informed decisions or having realistic plans. See, I may have the experience running projects maybe in Kenya, but what if this other project is in Botswana? Now, the environment is different, and therefore the OPS are going to be different, because I'll be in a probably different setting, in a different organization, I'll have different EFs. So anything you call a plan gives you the how-tos, and is always context specific. Context specific. The assumptions will be different, and so on and so forth. Now, by analyzing that data, we, of course, also pick the risks and uncertainties, etc. And then that informs how the planning is going to be done. One key point to pick here is that if we are able to correct the requirements, understand the requirements, and maybe they are stable, that would lead us to be convinced that we're going to use the predictive approach. Now, if by analyzing the information that's available, the requirements, etc., and maybe the changing regulatory landscape, then and we find that it's not stable, it's uncertain, we expect things to change over time, at least from the experience and the information that we have gathered, the data that we collected, then we should be ready to use the adaptive approach. So in other words, the planning activities involve collecting data that enables us to understand which approach to use. I normally get questions like, when do you decide that you're going to use the adaptive or the predictive approach? It's normally during planning, because that's when you get a sense of the nature of the work that you'll be handling. You get the sense of the environment in which you're operating in. You get the sense of the stakeholder requirements and expectations. And with that, then you understand that you'll be gravitating towards either the adaptive, or it looks like the requirements are stable, things seem to be so familiar, and therefore we will not expect significant changes. There will be changes, but not major changes. And looks like the customers understand what they want. We have had engagements with them through the process of correcting requirements. Looks like it's so clear. So it's during planning that you actually get to a point where you say, we're going to use the adaptive or the predictive. Now, we come to the real integration, where you bring all this information together as the planning information. And this could be information about the scope, like the scope requirements, the requirements that enable us to define the scope, the project requirements, all those sets of requirements that we correct and put together the requirements documentation. Now, of course, with that, once the scope is defined, it translates into, it informs the resources that we need. Now, once we understand the resources that we need to be assigned to the work that we have defined, to the scope of work that we have defined, then we establish how much those resources are going to cost. Then we also, of course, at the same time, establish the timelines for the project, which is the schedule, okay? Of course, which is informed by many factors, including, the customer's needs, customers' needs and expectations. If we are working towards launching a product in the month of September, then that's going to inform, of course, our planning. Okay? Those are constraints which you should have picked earlier. So the point here is that the scope, which informs the resource requirements, which informs the budgets, and which informs the quality requirements, and of course, which also enables us, by looking at the scope of the project, we are able to understand the risks or uncertainty that is associated with getting that work done, work package by work package. We ascertain the risks. Then what needs to be done is to have all these integrated, all this information integrated, so that if there is a slight change in the scope, it should be reflected in the budget, should be reflected in the schedule, should be reflected in the resources that have been assigned to the project. And of course, it will increase or reduce the risk exposure. Okay, you can go on. So here, this is where we have a list of subsidiary planning documents. You remember those? You have baselines, you have the scope management plans, you have the scope baselines, you have the schedule management plans, you have the list of activities, you have the schedule itself, you have the schedule baseline, you have the resource requirements. So you have all these planning documents put together. But the point here is that they must be speaking to each other. In other words, they are interrelated. The procurement management plan, the procurement approach that you use, the procurement strategy, it touches on everything. So once you put together all these planning subsidiary documents, they should be in alignment. They should be in alignment so that going forward, if one item changes, you should see the implications on the others. So I can say two things before we move on to the next slide. One is that the entire project should be integrated and they should be, they are interdependent. I think that's a better term. They are interdependent. Okay? The budget depends on the resources depend on the scope. The risks depend on, the nature of the work, the scope. The procurement depends on, the resources that we have and so on and so forth. And they are all interrelated. So that's how we integrate the planning information. In this case, the planning documents. The second point is that once we have the scope approved, the scope of the project approved, in other words, you have a scope baseline, that automatically leads to the schedule baseline, because we'll be scheduling the scope that has now been approved. That leads to the cost baseline now, which is the cost of the resources of the scope for the scope that has been approved. It goes on. So before we transition from the planning stage, we normally get a sign of the approval. Let me add on the third. The third point is that once you have the planning documents, the planning activities completed and planning documents approved, any change, if we're using the predictive, any change that comes after that, whether it's something to do with changes in the quality of a feature or a product or a deliverable will have to be assessed to see its impact on the other parameters of the project. If the scope of the project changes, if, for example, we have a budget constraint, maybe initially we had a budget, I don't know, of $80,000 for this project, and all of a sudden something has happened, maybe with the funders, and they are rolling back the funding, and the funding is going to now come down to around 50 million. So what's going to happen is that we're going to now go back and assess the impact of that change. So any change that happens has an impact on all the other parameters of the project, and that's again integration. So any change has got to be assessed to see how it impacts all the other aspects of the project that are fully integrated as one. And by integration, we are able to identify interdependencies, conflicts, and gaps. Very important, because it's during integration that you actually realize that some of the part of the scope is probably has not been assigned the right resources. Why? Because we did not assess the risks that are associated with doing that kind of work. And because of that, the resources are not adequate because we didn't cater for the risk. So once you have an integrated way of planning your project activities, in other words, one plan should speak to the other. One team should be doing what they are doing while they are synchronizing information, or also looking at the information that is coming from the other teams. You should be able to identify where there are gaps, where there are missing elements, where there is an item that seems to look like a stray item. It's not captured in the schedule, and yet it's part of the scope. There's something in the schedule that, you know, we don't know where it comes. We can't trace it to its source. Then you should be able to have a discussion on that and fix it. So an integrated project plan brings about consistency, and it's reassuring in terms of value delivery. Okay, it gives a sense of a feasible approach to doing work, a feasible project. It's complete. Nothing has been missed. Everything is linked to everything, and then that, of course, gives the assurance to the project sponsors, to the stakeholders, that we're going to deliver a good project. And also, it's good for the project team, because assuming we are working on the project planning activities as team A, and maybe some of the team members leave when we are transitioning into execution. Now, if we had a nicely integrated project plan, then irrespective of who else is coming on board, they should be able to take on the project, and they can trace every component and see the linkages, see the interdependencies, and so on and so forth. So sometimes the risk on projects is that this information is stored in people's heads, and once they leave, then there's an information blackout, and projects suffer. Okay, so we're better off with integrated project plans. Now, integration also has an aspect of measurement. So what are we measuring? Okay, because if you're going to track the scope of the project, if you're going to look at the impact of the changes, there should be those things that we're measuring. Okay, integration enables performance measurement. Okay, so we will have, of course, baselines, scope, schedule, and so on and so forth. And we also have, of course, talking about quality, you have the acceptance criteria and all that. That comes as a result of integration, and it tells us so much about our consistency from planning through execution and on to when we deliver value. And when we are testing, if I could take you back, if you remember the requirements traceability metrics and what it does, tracing requirements, tracing a feature back to where it came from, how it's linked to, you know, the functionality of the product through the process, how it's designed, built, and eventually tested, and what the kind of functionality that it will result into, the value that it will create. That's very important because then you can trace. Okay. So you use metrics to compare, again, when you are doing execution, you use metrics to compare actual and planned performance, detect variances, etc. But that's when we have clear metrics. So it ensures objective tracking and informed decision making. Again, about integration, we say it's done during planning. Fantastic, that's when it's supposed to be done. But along the way, changes could happen, and therefore we say integration is a continuous thing. So our project planning documents, our information should be fully aligned from the start, when we start collecting data, putting it together through the planning process, through execution, as we incorporate, as we introduce changes, there should be consistency. Okay, there should be consistency in the planning documents, because planning documents have to be updated from time to time whenever there are changes. Changes as in increasing the scope of the project, changes as in, you know, reduction of the budget, or maybe some of the prices of items going up, we incorporate that into our budget. And if decisions have been made during the past, I don't know, 2 weeks, the effect of those decisions and the impact of those decisions on our project work have got to be reflected into our planning documents. And that's why even at the end of a project, you have project documentation. As part of the project documentation, you are able to trace how changes were introduced. You remember the configuration management system, you know, seeing how changes were introduced, what the impact was, and then you're able to see the different versions of your project documentation. Why? Because it's all integrated. And then at the end, you have like the final documents that reflect the final project documentation that reflects what we just completed. So now you could have a snapshot of your project planning documentation when the project was just getting started, getting off the ground, and also another snapshot of the project documentation, including the scope that has just been completed, compared to what we actually had at the beginning. And you clearly see that, you know, that's as a result of proper integration, capturing information, updating the project planning documents. And of course, in this day and age, you don't do that manually. You have a peer project management information system that is that enables integration. That's another fact. Integration is enabled, is made easy if you're using a system. Okay, so I believe most of us either have knowledge about how to use one of the project management information systems, or is planning to probably do training right after your PMP certification. This is a strong recommendation that you learn how to use some of the PMISs so that you can use them in your project planning. They are helpful in integration because the way they are built, they allow integration. If I change the duration, or if an activity is postponed, it won't start next Monday, but the other Monday, and I put it into the system, it shows me the effect of that change on the entire project. So that's because it's all integrated. Okay, so that's the effect of the PMIS is very important, and that could help track the different versions of your project documents from planning through execution at different stages or different phases until the end of the project, when you have the final project documentation that reflects what we have eventually ended up with. All right, so that's the first task. This next task, which is, in my view, not very much different from The first one is planning and managing project closure or transition. Now, we normally say that it's very good. It's always good to start very well, to plan and get get a very, very good start. But then the problem is that you can start very well. If we do not have a clear way of ending what we have just started, then we are quoting disaster. Remember, at the end of the day, what is required is actually value. The stakeholders are not very much interested in the activities of the project. They're actually interested in the result and how it will create value for them. So how we close the project is very important, okay? So the closure of a project or a phase could be due to two reasons or could come in two forms. The first one is when the project is successfully completed, and that's fulfillment. Stakeholders accept deliverables based on, the predefined, agreed upon acceptance criteria, and they believe we have done all that we were supposed to do, and it's all been closed and closed very well. And then everybody is notified, and we can trace every requirement, and you get the approval, and the project is closed successfully. You could also have another form of closure where we did not achieve what we actually set out to achieve. Now, it could be for bad reasons, or it might actually be the best thing that could happen. It could be bad because maybe we were constrained, something happened, unfortunately, we're not able to, deliver what we're supposed to deliver, or maybe we realized midway during the course of the project that we were working on something that does not add so much value, that's not aligned with, the needs of the stakeholders. So that's premature or forced closure of a project or even a phase. This is a situation when the project is no longer feasible. It could be due to internal or external factors. Internal, as the organization could change. I'll give you an example. If I'm working for an organization and I'm managing a project, and this organization has been acquired by another entity, and normally what they normally do is that to assess what's going on with the organization, and one of the things that they will look at is the projects, especially the bigger projects. And therefore, if they look at the project that Robert has been handling, and they realize that actually this is meant to deliver a product that they already have in the parent organization that has just acquired, our organization, they might stop that project. Why? Because they don't need that product; they already have it. Okay, that could be, a change in the organizational priorities as a result of a merger or acquisition, something like that. Or maybe the strategy, the priorities change. It could also be as a result of external factors. Maybe there are regulatory changes, or it could even be due to a change of the business landscape. Okay, maybe change of technology, could even be a change in the security situation. Okay, we've done trainings for UN staff, and they work in different places. Some of them work in high-risk places, and sometimes some of the projects have had to be abandoned midway, not because they are bad projects, not because they are not technically feasible, but they are, in terms of the security, they cannot proceed. And they wait for some time, and looks like this is not going to improve anytime soon, and then the project is abandoned. So the project or deliverable, is not going to be realized. So that's like an impediment or an obstacle, a security situation, weather conditions that become so adverse, laws that change, regulations that change, etc. Now, I already mentioned that maybe what if it is a financial rollback? The funders have no longer have the appetite to fund the project. Okay, financial support is no longer available to complete the requirements, and so on and so forth. So a project can be completed successfully, or it could be prematurely closed. Now, if talking about closing a project, there are a set of things which I put into steps, yeah, form of steps that you go through to close a project or a phase. One, we should have with us a clear closure criteria. What does the done item, what does success look like? How shall we know that this is completed? Okay. Normally from the business case, we have the project objectives. Once they are realized, then, we are there. Success measures maybe a number of a product with a number of features or this level of performance and so on and so forth. Or the work being completed, scope completion, acceptance requirements met, etc. And of course, normally in such a case, you also have the things that you want to validate. You remember validating the scope, confirming that all deliverables are completed and accepted. Who does that? Of course, the customer or the stakeholders. And of course, the other things that happen, are to do with compliance with contractual and organizational requirements. We have closed the project, or the contracts that we had with the third parties have been closed. They have all been brought to a successful closure, and we have met all the organizational requirements that have something to do with the closure. So in other words, before you even discuss how the project is going to end, you should define what you want to see at the end. What are those things that will have to tick, the boxes that you have to check to confirm that the project has indeed come to the end. Now, the second point that we look at here is validating readiness for transition. So now, one, you have to ensure that the project is completed, the acceptance criteria is met, the definition of done, you have done the testing, you have done the validation, all that. Now, that's one side of it. The other side of it is validating readiness for transition. So I'm sure we all remember the change management effort that is normally required on projects that create an impact, that change the ways people have always done things in an organization. For example, if it's a project, a project to introduce a new system in an organization, which is going to replace legacy systems, old systems, there are two things. There are two strands of things that we look at. One is the work itself, delivering a new system that meets the requirements. But then on the other hand, since it's a new system, there's the soft part. Will there be appetite for adoption? Won't there be resistance? Will people be happy to embrace change? So this is another aspect that you have to consider. You don't just close a project, you also want to ensure that there is smooth transition, because remember, at the end of the day, the end users, the sponsors of the project, sponsored because they were looking at the value at the end of it. When you handle this product and it's our system and it starts being used, it's going to increase our efficiency, we cut down costs, it's going to increase customer satisfaction. It's all, so there are a number of things, a number of benefits that are expected. Those can only be realized if the transition is good, if the receiving organization or the receiving entity is prepared for the change. Okay, so we confirm the solution is ready for handover to operations or support teams, transition to the next project or phase. Now, the handing over might be accompanied by a number of things. Let's look at the second bullet. First of all, there's proper documentation, which gives us the assurance that all the boxes are checked and we have done everything that we had to do. Number two, the other team, the operations, the receiving organization has got the knowledge, has got the skills to run the system, okay, to receive and put the system or the product to use. So that's training if needed. And then there could be support, maybe for a couple of months after we have handed over, we provide support so that there is a smooth transition. And the benefit of that is that it ensures smooth handover and continuity, ensuring that the customer is ready for change and success. And readiness may require additional change management effort to ensure that there is adoption and that we deal with or overcome resistance. So this is the whole point of validating readiness for transition when we are at a project closure. It's not just about delivering products, delivering a product with features that have been tested and it's all good. It's also about looking on the other side, who is receiving it, how prepared they are, do they have the legal framework in place for this to work for them? For those of you who work on national projects, has that been thought through? Otherwise, how will it be regulated, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, what ties it up all together is, the closing out, and which is, of course, administrative, contractual, etc. The final lessons learned and retrospectives, because every project is unique. And in terms of knowledge management, the project, you're better off as an organization adding to the organizational knowledge resources by collecting lessons learned. So you have a lessons learned repository, which has got knowledge that we've gained over time for the projects that have been running. If you're using the adaptive, you can talk about retrospectives, and which give sense not only on how to improve the next cycle of work, like the next release, the next iteration, but at the end of it, we have lessons. And that's why organizations that will have spent time doing certain projects will have knowledge resources, not just with people, but also documented, captured in an easy to retrieve, access way. Then you, of course, ensure that there are no legal contractual strings that have been left hanging. Okay, a professional project manager will ensure that they have closed the procurements and contracts and so on and so forth. Next would be to finalize any financial and budget issues. You close the accounts. In other words, ensure that all the information is put together and you have that one properly closed. Then you release the resources, release the team, release that working space that you're using, release the vehicles, release the systems that you have been using. So you're able to, release so that we can go back to the sponsors. If they were seconded, if they were lent to us for project purposes, we have to return them. This depends on the organizational policies, could be through auctioning. If this is a one-time project and, we acquired these resources to use on the project. And then we now archive project documents and records. And this ensures formal, complete, and compliant closure. Next is the third task, which is planning and managing project compliance. Now, this is becoming much more relevant in this day and age because we all run projects in highly regulated environments, whether these are tech projects or they are agriculture projects or they are engineering projects or they are organizational restructuring kind of projects, or maybe the projects that some of you are responsible for in form of events. You manage events, but there are regulations, there are laws, there are compliance requirements. So a professional project manager, I always say, will not be excused if they are found to be leading a project and this project is not complying with the regulations. Okay, it's non-compliant. Normally it comes with heavy penalties, and definitely if you're fired because you are leading a project that violated the regulations or something like that, it doesn't go down well with your CV, with your reputation. Okay, so this is something that is treated very seriously, or should be treated very seriously by any professional project manager. So the key principles here are compliance. One, it has to be understood. When should that happen? When we are planning. When we are planning, as we assess the EEFs, the enterprise environmental factors, we get to pick the compliance requirements. They have to be understood. We can pick them ourselves. We can rely on the PMO. We can rely on the subject matter experts that we identify or legal advisors through a due diligence or manner of approaches. Then they are understood, prioritized, and continuously monitored. The PMO oversees compliance requirements at the organizational level, normally, if your organization has got a PMO. But now, in terms of complying on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis, as we perform the project activities, it is a responsibility of the project manager. The responsibility for compliance falls squarely on the project manager. Now, if you're a professional, definitely a lot is expected from you. Now, let's look at how it's all done. This is very important because even when let's talk about answering your exams, your PMP exams. You need to understand that compliance requirements can be identified early, or they may actually be discovered. For example, if there are new regulations, and to know how they will impact on your project, So identify and prioritize requirements. These are compliance requirements. So this could be in form of laws, regulations, corporate policies, and so on and so forth. So you can talk about environmental laws or regulations. You can talk about data protection and privacy laws. You can talk about healthy and safety laws or regulations. You can talk about tax laws. You can talk about labor laws. You can talk about even organizational policies. They come in as compliance requirements. Okay. And then align the quality policy and project risks, prioritize based on impact and risk of non-compliance. See, there are some compliance requirements that could cost the entire project. Okay, they can bring it down, they can shut down the project, they can blacklist the organization that's behind the project. That's very important. So when we are prioritizing, we are looking at the impact of non-compliance. And talking about risk management strategies, this will attract a lot of attention when it comes to the mitigating measures on how to deal with the risks. Next, once we have identified the compliance requirements and documented them, the next logical thing is to identify governance and responsibilities. Who is responsible for what? Now, if your project is sizable and you have, a lot of compliance requirements, it might be prudent to have a compliance officer accompanying the project team to remind everyone, to check on what each and every team is doing to ensure that we are compliant, because the cost of non-compliance is really, really high. Okay, so clarify who manages compliance. Is it the PMO? Do we have a legal officer? Do we have, quality assurance? Do we have audit teams? Do we have a compliance team? Okay, I've worked on a project which was really sizable, and it had the compliance team. Okay, so they are responsible for, one, ensuring that the entire team fully understands the compliance requirements. Number two, identifying any new compliance requirements that could emerge once the project is on course. So, and once they identify it, they bring it to the attention of the project management team. Three, they do quality audits. Okay, and in some instances, you can see PMI proposes that there's a compliance council. Okay, especially this could be at the level of the PMO and so on and so forth. And then ensure that the team and the stakeholders are aware. Sometimes it could require some regular drills or even some sort of trainings on the compliance requirements, so that across the board, everybody is informed. Why? The stakes are high. Next, integrate compliance into our project plans. Now, earlier on we talked about integrated project planning. It means that we'll have also captured the compliance requirements, activities that have to be done in order to comply with the regulations and laws, etc. And this will be part of, our project plans. Will be a part of the scope of the project, and we need to assign resources to those compliance activities. All right. Then this could be captured under risk management or quality management or even procurement. Then document requirements, controls, and procedures. Number 4, during execution, we monitor and control compliance. We track compliance in processes, vendor and procurement activities. We conduct compliance audits and reviews. So 1, you identified compliance requirements. 2, they were documented and you are able to train the teams and all that. Now, once the project is off the ground during execution, you definitely need to, 1, keep your ear on the ground, but also number 2, check your backyard. That's something I could say. Check your backyard. Ensure that we are doing the right thing. So you conduct or request that compliance audits be done so that internally, so that we don't wait until external regulators come in and find that, out of, 15 compliance requirements, we are falling short by 5, okay? We could have discovered that if we had requested for audits, internal audits, so that we get to, get our act together. Next, manage risks and update documentation. If there are any risks associated with compliance, we need to manage them. What do we mean by that? Assess the impact, come up with mitigating or risk management measures, okay? Mitigation actions, address non-compliance quickly. It requires urgency, okay? And then number 6, verify and close compliance. Now, at the end of every project, you want to confirm that all regulatory and quality requirements are met. Ensure proper documentation and approvals. Remember, most of the projects that we handle, especially sizable projects that work in, that are done in organizations or are sponsored by reputable organizations, they will want to come and do an audit because they want to be compliant. Compliance is one thing that has a lot to do or comes to bear when it comes to reputation. So every organization wants to be seen to be compliant. Okay, so there will be an audit, and therefore we want the compliance documentation to be put together properly, ready for review by anybody. And then, of course, we capture lessons learned, of course, which is normally part of the project closure process. Okay. Okay, so that's the second, rather the third task. I want us to have, I wish to request that we have a short break, and then when we come back, we start looking at some of the questions, general questions, and we, engage and see how we prepare ourselves for the typical PMP exam questions. Is that okay, Nelson?
Yeah, that's okay.
Thank you. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, shall we start? You can put your answers in the chat room, and I'll be putting, once we pick the answer, once we get to the answer, I'll be giving a little explanation, and then we move on. Right. Okay. Two team members have a persistent personality clash. Which conflict resolution technique aligns best with long-term team performance? This sounds like an easy question, no-brainer, but it's meant to remind us that, when you are eliminating the wrong answers, you should have a good understanding of, the project management knowledge. If you look at the first one, yes, it's a conflict resolution technique. Is it one that is sustainable, that will lead to long-term performance? No. Second one is smoothing. Yes. When is it used? It's used to, calm down the tensions. It's meant to bring harmony, but that could be for a short time. It could be temporary. Yes. It could also be that we are prioritizing harmony over, some sort of tension. So we want to calm down the tempers. C is the one that is more sustainable, collaborating, problem solving, getting viewpoints from different people. However, it requires time. You as a project team leader, as a project manager, you need to have the facts. You need time to speak to the different team members to understand where the conflict is coming from, so that you can get to the root cause and resolve it. Now, D is sometimes people think it's one of the least desirable also, but it might be the right thing to do if you do not have much information, you do not have the facts, and therefore you can't jump in as a leader to resolve a conflict because you do not have the facts. And if you try to do it, you can actually do it the wrong. You can make the wrong decisions, the wrong decision or the wrong judgment because you do not have facts, and that will cost you your trust amongst the team. So you might decide to step back until you get the facts so that you can, make the right judgment. So in this case, since we're talking about long-term team performance, definitely the answer is C. Okay. Aims for a win-win solution, addressing the interests of both parties. It supports long-term team health. Okay. Next. Okay. During execution, a recurring communication breakdown occurs between the remote and on-site team members. How should the PM formally handle it? A, add it to the risk register. So what happens when we add it to the risk register? We have documented it. Now, I need to remember the difference between a risk and an issue. Okay, a risk is something that is uncertain. It could happen, or it may not even happen. Okay, but you identify it as something that could actually occur. So it's something that could or could not happen in the future. But the situation we are looking at here is that a recurring communication breakdown occurs. When it has occurred, it means it has happened. It's no longer something that we take to the risk register, but it's something that has actually occurred. Okay, so this question reinforces the difference between a risk and an issue. B, document it as an issue in the issue log. So what happens? When you document it as an issue in the issue log, it means it's something we have to act on now. To remind you, the issue log has a number of, has key information that must be captured, must be visible. One, the issue itself, the description of the issue, when the issue occurred, who is going to be the issue owner, somebody who is responsible, and in our estimation, the due date when this issue should be resolved, and another column, say, for the status. So issues are reviewed typically in every project, could be weekly, but every project meeting. Why? Because we want to check whether there are still open issues, things that need to be resolved that have taken long without being resolved. Okay, so that's where you take this issue. C, ignore it, assuming it will fix itself over time. I'm sure all of us eliminated that. We could not pick that. You don't, as a PM, you don't ignore things. D, raise it as a change request. To change what? Okay, so that was also an unlikely answer. So communication breakdowns, recurring problems, so they should be formally tracked as issues, not just risks, to be managed and resolved. And the time for their resolution should be stated so that, they do not affect the progress of the project or the performance of the project. Okay, next. Okay, we want everyone to, participate. Yeah, a key stakeholder expresses frustration that the delivered product doesn't solve their core business need. Okay, what is the PM's most appropriate next step? A, ask the stakeholder to submit a formal complaint. B, perform a root cause analysis to understand the real reason for dissatisfaction. C, rework the product to add more features, and D, escalate directly to the steering committee. Of course, very quickly, for those of you who have been practicing with these questions, there are options here that you disqualify. Okay, like D, escalate directly to the steering committee. No. Otherwise, the steering committee will think that the PM is incompetent. They are not capable of solving problems. So that one is out. C, rework the product to add more features. But which features? Okay, so they are complaining. So you have to first exactly establish what it is that is the problem. So normally, whenever there are technical problems, there are performance issues on a project, the first thing that we do, and this should be a guide in our thinking when we are looking at some of these problems, is to get to the root cause. Get to the root cause. And then some other questions will actually test to see whether you know that you have to involve the team. Okay, anything technical, you involve the team. So performing a root cause analysis is a plausible thing to understand the real reason for dissatisfaction and then know what to do. A, ask the stakeholder to submit a formal complaint. That does not help solve the problem. Okay, you're trying to be very bureaucratic and so on. Okay? So before acting, the PM should dig into the stakeholder, why the stakeholder feels the product isn't meeting their business need. This avoids assumptions and ensures remediation addresses the right problem. Okay, most of you must have gotten this answer correct. Next. This question also reinforces the fact that whenever there is a quality problem, there is a performance problem, what you need to do first before you take any action, you deploy your resources or ask the team to do something, before you move in action, you swing into action, you have got to first get to the root cause, okay? So initiate a root cause and analysis and corrective action, okay? But by saying document the defect and request a scope increase doesn't sound like a plausible one, because what are you increasing, okay? A deliverable fails quality testing. It means something is wrong. What should the project manager do to correct the problem? First, find out where are we failing, okay? Ignore the defect if delivery date is tight. No, we all know that. No, that wouldn't be a plausible answer. D, ask the team to redo the task without deeper investigation. Of course, that one is also not a plausible one. So a defect should trigger root cause investigation, so the team understands why it happened and applies corrective and preventive actions. Fix the existing, and in such a way that you also avoid a recurrence of the same. Next. Multiple stakeholders have conflicting quality expectations. Some want speed, others care deeply about robustness. Okay, what should the PM? How should the PM proceed? Okay, so you have conflicting stakeholder expectations or requirements. Now, in such a case, of course, you don't take sides as a professional. You won't favor one over the other. What you need to do is to reconcile those conflicting expectations, and this requires a mature PM. First of all, who has active listening skills. You are able to show understanding when you are engaging each one of those stakeholders and get to understand where they come from, why they prefer speed, and so on and so forth. And also show understanding to the other stakeholders who probably are looking at a quality product, okay? And they're saying, we don't care even if it delays for a couple of weeks, but as long as you give us something that is robust, that is reliable, and so on and so forth. So you have got to be a mature project manager, somebody who has that level of emotional intelligence to put yourself in their positions, listen to them, and then facilitate. You should have facilitation skills, be able to help them reconcile their positions. Okay, show reason for speed, but without compromising robustness. Show reason why robustness matters, and show reason why we are not ignoring speed. Okay. All right. So with that light explanation, I'm sure most of us picked the correct answer. This question reinforces the fact that when you have stakeholders with conflicting positions, the best thing is to engage them and reconcile those, differing or conflicting positions. And that could be through a facilitated workshop, a meeting with them, as you reconcile their differences. You can't go for A, you're choosing the expectation of the most powerful stakeholder. You wouldn't go for that. You wouldn't go as a professional. You have got to be very objective, and you're always pro-project. Yeah. C, ignore stakeholder quality demands and follow internal standards. We don't ignore people. We don't ignore stakeholders for that matter. We have to listen to them, and their demands, their expectations are given due consideration, should be given due consideration. D, set minimum acceptance quality to avoid conflict. That might be a good thing, but then you don't set them as a PM. They are normally supposed to be a result of a discussion with the stakeholders, and then you agree on what's acceptable. There will be trade-offs from the different positions, standpoints of the stakeholders, and then you arrive at the right decision. Okay. So bringing stakeholders together to negotiate and align on quality criteria helps set a shared standard that balances different priorities. Okay. So this question meant to emphasize the fact that when we have two stakeholders that have a disagreement, could even be two team members that have different positions on how to approach a piece of work or a technique, then you have got to facilitate a meeting where you reconcile their positions. Next question. Okay, sure, getting it right. And here is a concept that we want to emphasize, okay, which is of course related to our area discussion. The compliance department raises concern that the project's way of working might violate regulatory requirements. So this project has the benefit of working with a compliance department, okay? And that, of course, is very important because they provide advisory on, the compliance requirements and all that, and this is exactly what they have done. How did the PM respond? A, push back, claiming it slows delivery. That would be a huge risk, okay? That would be taking on a risk of ignoring a compliance requirement. About anything about compliance is mandatory. There are no two ways about it. You can't avoid it, okay? And therefore pushing back is not an option. B, engage compliance, map the requirements, and integrate compliance checks into the project plan. So now that somebody has given us a warning, now that somebody has raised a concern, we want to make sure we put in place a mechanism, okay, that a plan that will enable us keep track of those compliance requirements so that we are sure we are doing the right thing, we are doing things the right way, we are complying. Okay, so we make sure we capture the requirements, we map the requirements, we integrate them into our plans, and we always check. Okay, we monitor. C, delegate compliance to the team. Now, anything to do with compliance, to do with regulations, as we said earlier on, is considered to be a risk, a high risk. Why? Because non-compliance comes with heavy sanctions. This could be in form of penalties, could be in form of reputational damage, and therefore it's something that is handled or gets the attention of the PM. So it can't be delegated to the team. That would be some sort of negligence. D, document the concern and revisit at project closure. Of course, that's not acceptable. You don't document and then fold your hands until the project comes to closure and you say, oh, by the way, did we comply? That might be too late. Okay? So compliance is critical, it's a high risk. The PM must involve compliance experts, understand requirements, and embed compliance control activities in the schedule, create time for them, allocate resources to manage risk proactively. Okay. Next question. Super. So the PM wants to better understand team dynamics and suggests using the Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI survey. So this is a survey, a survey that is done to assess or to understand the different personalities, okay? And what is a wise first step, okay? So the PM wants to understand team dynamics and they want to use this tool, this model for surveying personalities. Okay, wants to understand, for example, people who are good communicators, people who are reserved, yeah, also referred to as introverts, wants to know those that are extroverts, wants to know those that are more focused on details and so on and so forth, understanding the personalities. So what would be the first step? A, force everyone to take the test. So this question emphasizes two things that we have to learn as PMPs, as we are preparing the exam, and of course, project managers that want to, have the best practices on our fingertips. So A, force everyone to take the test. Anything you think is a test, anything that you want to do with the team, you don't use force. Not in this day and age. Actually, it's not just the project managers, but modern management discourages forcing people to do things. You have to use persuasion. You must show them the reason why, the benefit of doing something. You must make a strong case so that people buy into it, and that way you get them committed, and that way you win their trust. Okay. Otherwise, they will feel like they are being bullied to do certain things, and you're not building the desired high-performing team. Okay, so A is out of question. B, explain why the test is useful. Okay, so you're persuading them, you're showing them reason why. Now, B will bring out the second point that I want us to pay attention to on this question. So the first one was, how do you introduce like a survey within the team? You have to convince them. You have to persuade them, show them the reason. Number two is what I'm driving at. Explain why the test is useful, ensure it's voluntary, and use results to plan team building exercises. Now, the second point here is that such tests should not be used to segregate, to stereotype, to classify people, to give them labels. No, it's actually used in team building, in knowing how to communicate, knowing how to pair people, how to coach them, how to support them. Okay. C, assigning working groups purely based on test type. Now, that's normally the dark side of people who are unprofessional. They use such tests to classify people and assign them responsibilities, roles, etc. on the team. That's not the purpose of such a survey, such a personality test or survey. D, use the test to decide who leads and who reports to whom. C and D are could be said to be the misuse of personality tests. Okay, while A is a wrong approach. So here the points are, how do you approach it, and how do you use the results of those personality tests? Very important. Okay. So introducing personality assessments like MBTI should be done, first of all, transparently and respectfully. So it has got to be voluntary. Participation will be voluntary, and the results should be used for positive team development, not for performance ranking. Okay, not for performance ranking. So that you can coach, you can support, you can pair people, and so on and so forth. Remember, there are people, for example, if you remember McClelland's theory, you have people who have a high need for affiliation and those that have a low need for affiliation. So that you shouldn't judge them by such. Instead, you should know what they are good at, know how to pair them with others, and so on and so forth. Next. Right. I'm sure you're all able to put a finger on the right answer. And again, this one is also meant to remind us about one concept. That's Bruce Tuckman's team development model. Okay, and what happens at each stage. So two team members constantly argue during sprint planning. Constantly argue. Okay, the project manager realizes the team is in the storming phase. What should the PM do? Now, when you're studying the Bruce Tuckman's team development model, and you're looking at the forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, the most important thing for us as PMs is to know what we should be doing at every stage. Not knowing what's happening is good, but that's not enough. What should be the role of the PM, or what should the project manager be doing when the team is at the forming stage? You clarify roles, you cast the vision, you make sure there is a shared understanding of what the project is about. That's during the forming stage. People have just been put together, the team has been assembled, so you want to make sure they understand why they are there, what the project objectives are, and so on and so forth at the onset. Now, once you're through with that, then the team gets, fold their sleeves and start working. Now, the moment they start working, then you have conflicting viewpoints, approaches. You have some people's egos being hurt and they are pushing back, and you have friction, and you have disagreements, and you have different personalities now coming out. So that's the storming stage. And they're asking, what should the PM do? Now, during that second stage, the PM is supposed to facilitate discussion, consensus, dialogue, help people to talk to each other, help them understand that, we all have different viewpoints, we come from different backgrounds. Let's listen to each other. There's nothing like we shouldn't quickly say this is wrong, this is right, but this could be different perspectives. Somebody is coming from the telecoms industry and now is coming from banking and now is coming from, I don't know, IT, and they have different viewpoints. And if you project that as the way of doing things, that there should be dialogue, we should listen to each other, and that everyone is going to benefit by learning from the other, then you'll steer the team through the storming stage quick, smoothly, and you get to the next stage, okay? Because the storming stage is supposed to, it shouldn't take so long. If it takes long, then the environment becomes toxic, okay? So that's what the PM is supposed to be doing, and B is the correct answer. Coach the team through conflict, facilitate a norms discussion, build trust, and so on and so forth. Now, the opposite is also true. If you have a PM who is not mature, they will start taking sides. They will start judging. Anything that they don't know, they don't even give a chance to listen to what others have to say. You'll be surprised if you give somebody a chance. They will explain what their approach is like, and they will justify it, and it will be a great learning experience for the rest of the team. C, replace one team member with a more mature one. No, replacement is not a solution. D, escalate their conflict to HR. No, this is the responsibility of the PM, and the PM should handle it. Okay. Right. So you can see in the storming phase of team development, the PM's role is to help the team surface and work through tension, clarify team norms, and build mutual trust. So that's when the maturity, the skillfulness of the PM comes to bear during storming. That's where you see a good PM and not a good PM. Okay. All right. Next. Okay? A prominent stakeholder is persistently unsatisfied with how feedback is handled. They interrupt meetings and undermine team morale. What's the best action? A prominent stakeholder, prominent, not just any stakeholder. Okay? What's the best action? A, publicly reprimand them during the next meeting. Where here they're asking about the best action for a PM actually. Okay? How when they ask action, it's what would a project manager do? Publicly reprimand them during the next meeting. Is that a good thing? That might actually cause a reaction that will be difficult to handle, because if this is a prominent stakeholder, the PM may not have, may not be in position to reprimand the stakeholder. And if they try, then it might backfire in a very, very bad way. B, escalate the issue to the sponsor, proposing a mediation session. This is a prominent stakeholder, and they are interrupting meetings, undermining team morale. Okay, and so what do? This is not for you. If this was a team member, then you would definitely be able to settle the matters at your level. But this is a prominent stakeholder. Okay. Right, C, remove them from the stakeholder register. This is a prominent stakeholder, you can't remove them. What if this is the funder for the project? What if this is a regulator? Or if this is somebody who is maybe a leader of an interest group, of a beneficiary group? You can't remove them from the stakeholder. That's not the way to go. D, avoid them and minimize their involvement. That could even worsen the situation, because once they feel that they are being avoided or ignored, then you could actually have a much nasty reaction. So definitely, since this is a prominent stakeholder, it would be logical to escalate. So you only escalate if something is, if an issue is beyond what reasonably a PM can handle. That's when you consider escalating. Because here you have to pay attention to the words prominent stakeholder. If a stakeholder's behavior is undermining morale, can't be resolved at the project level, the PM should ask the sponsor to help mediate, ensuring respect and structure. That was the best question, the best answer. The rest fall short, one way or another. Next. Right? The project has experienced repeated delays in one phase. The PM identifies several symptoms, but isn't sure what the underlying cause is, what technique is most effective. Okay, of course. If the PM is unsure, then has to do something to be sure about the cause so they can address it. Again, this reinforces the other fact that whenever there is a problem, whenever there is an issue, technical team related to the stakeholders, relating to the approach that we are using, then the first thing is to identify the root cause. Okay, if it has something to do with being unsure whether we are doing what we ought to be doing, then what you do at the first thing is to refer to the plan, whether it is a quality management plan, whether it's a risk management plan, where it's like, which approach did we agree on? How did we agree we should resolve this? Okay, so in this case, of course, it can't be the Pareto chart analysis. With the Pareto chart analysis, you're looking for the few causes of the majority of the issues, okay? The few things that you can fix and resolve the bigger chunk of issues. That's the Pareto. It helps you prioritize, work on things on causes that matter most. And here you can only get to use the Pareto chart after doing the root cause analysis, because when you get the root cause, and assuming there are several root causes, then you find out which causes have the biggest impact. Then you prioritize those. C, brainstorming with the team without a structured process. That could be one way of identifying the root causes, but brainstorming normally, well, it would come after the other root causes, because with the 5 whys, you are actually asking. Once you see the symptom, you start from the symptom. Why is this happening? Then somebody should explain. There could be 5 whys, could be more than 5. You could arrive at the root cause before you even get to the 5th why. Okay, so this situation is where every answer leads you to the next question. D, asking the sponsor for a schedule extension. That can only happen if we find that the underlying causes will affect the project completion date, and therefore we have to request for an extension of time, or maybe a change. This would be done through a change request. Okay. So structured techniques like 5 whys help go beyond surface symptoms to discover the underlying drivers of repeated delays, so corrective action can target the real problem. Next question. Fine. So after identifying a recurring defect, okay, something that, keeps failing, what is the PM's responsibility in balancing corrective action and preventive action? Okay. Balancing corrective action and preventive action. Because sometimes, or even without knowing, we end up focusing on corrective actions, fixing the problems, and paying less attention to, the preventive actions, things that we need to do to ensure that the problem does not recur. A, focus only on correcting the current defect where it's about balancing, so it can't be A. B, propose only preventive actions to avoid future defects. That one is also not about balancing. C, use root cause analysis to define both corrective and preventive actions. So when you get to the root cause of those defects, the recurring defects, then you know why they are failing. Once you've identified the whys, then you can both fix the problem, okay, fix the whys, and then take measures so that you do not fall into the same situation again. D, leave it entirely to the quality assurance team that's being passive. So in this question, you can see that a PM must plan both to ensure quality improvements and reduce recurrence. In other words, fix the problem at the same time, make sure you're taking preventive actions to help avoid it in the future. Next question. Okay, so in this question, we are back to compliance. And during the initiation, a compliance officer warns the PM that some project activities might infringe on data privacy regulations. Now, if on my project, I'm lucky to have a compliance officer working with me, that would be very good. And here the compliance officer is doing the right thing, pointing out things that we really need to pay attention to. And this is about data privacy regulations. And we said regulations are a no-go. You can't avoid them. There are no two ways about it. They are mandatory. We have to comply. So what should the project manager do when they have been advised on the next compliance requirement? A, note the concern in the risk register and plan mitigation. Okay. Look here, it's something that they are warning us that could happen. Okay. Okay, so we need to pay attention to that and work towards avoiding it, which we can see where the answer lies. B, ask compliance to resolve the issue on their own. Is this an issue? The answer is no. Why? It has not yet happened. If it had happened, it would be an issue. But this is something that might happen. What the compliance officer warns the PM that some project activities might not. Okay, so it's uncertain. So that one can't fall under the issues. And again, asking compliance to resolve it, that's not, it's actually supposed to be the responsibility of the teams that are performing the project activities to act in a way that is in compliance with the regulations. C, proceed anyway, assuming the risk is minimal. So that assumption is wrong. Okay, because I started off by saying with compliance, there are no two ways about it. We have to comply. Okay, so you can't simply jump to the conclusion that I assume the risk is minimal. D, cancel the project. No, we don't do that. The decision to cancel the project is not made by the PM. That's the first thing. Yeah, as a PM, you can't declare that this project is cancelled. People would think that they should be taken to a mental hospital. PM it's not the responsibility of the PM to cancel the project. Next thing is that there are things that might lead to the PM recommending a reassessment or possible termination of the project. But get me right, it's a recommendation by the PM. So in such cases, it's when you have assessed the risk and looks like this risk the extent, the magnitude of the impact is so much. And in such cases, you escalate maybe with a recommendation. Okay. It means these are things that could happen, and if they were to happen, they would bring down the project. So here the answer is indeed A. Okay, note the concern in the risk register. In other words, book that compliance risk in the risk register, and we know what happens with the risk register. Once you identify a risk, then the next is to analyze it, assess its impact and likelihood of occurrence. And based on that, you come up with a risk response plan. What should we plan to do to deal with this risk? Okay. And you know there are a number of risk response strategies depending on the scale, depending on the ranking of the risk. If it's high impact, high likelihood, and it also depends if it's within the purview of the PM, then you might actually have to work towards avoiding that risk. If it's beyond the purview, the threshold of a PM, then you have to escalate. But if it is within the purview of the PM, then and it's high risk, high impact, it might you might go for avoiding. Next in ranking would be to maybe share the risk. And then next in ranking might be mitigate, take action to reduce the likelihood of such an incident, an event happening, and if it was to happen, minimize its impact on your project. Okay. And then lastly, would be to accept. You accept if the impact is really low, it's negligible, and the likelihood of occurrence is almost very, very low, it's minimal, and therefore it's not worth the resources, the effort. Okay. So that's what you do with such a concern on a compliance risk. Note it in the risk register and plan how to deal with it. Maybe with the compliance, you need to train your people so that they understand how to act in a compliant way, okay? And two, have proper documentation, even the procedures on what they should be doing in order to, stay within the compliance limits, and also monitor and control to ensure that they are doing the right thing, and so on and so forth. So on that note, I come to the end. I hope this was helpful, and especially I believe for those who are preparing for the PMP exam, especially the questions that enable you to think through the questions and the reasoning and so on and so forth. I wish you all the best. Over to you, Mr. Nelson.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert. This was very insightful. And I'm sure the candidates will also say the same thing. We're going to take just one question because of the time. And I see Anna's hand is up. I'm going to allow you to ask your question and then we'll close. Okay, we have Magdalene. Magdalene, you can unmute.
Okay, thank you. I was asking during the presentation, he had said that when you say plan, I was asking that when you say planning is ongoing, because he mentioned that planning is ongoing. So I wanted to know if planning is ongoing, is it for both traditional and agile, or it's just for agile?
Okay, I handle that first. Thank you very much. Of course, let's begin with the predictive. With predictive, definitely you have a plan. And once you're through with the planning stage, you get a sign off, you get approval. If it's, scope that you have been defining, you get a baseline, the scope that has been clearly defined, and you get a sign of scope baseline. So that any change that comes afterwards, we know, has to go through a process, a change control process to ensure that it adds value after, of course, assessing the impact, same as schedule, etc. But now, if there is a change that is found to be adding value and it's approved, it's something that, it's a change, or there are multiple changes, they would lead to updating the initial baseline, which we call rebaselining. So in other words, you are updating your project management planning documents. So you have to update all the planning documents that you developed during the planning stage to reflect the plan that we are using to date. So that's what I meant by planning that kind of goes on. You continuously update your project planning documents as the project evolves through execution and so on and so on and so on and so forth. So that at the end, you have the latest, the final or the most up-to-date planning documents that incorporate all the changes, all the updates that occurred during the course of the project. Now, if we switch to the adaptive, which we know that you plan as we go, you adapt your plan depending on the feedback that you get on what's working, what's not working, what have we learned, and so on and so forth. There, of course, it's obvious that planning is a revolving thing, so it's an ongoing thing. We plan and replan. We plan as we go. That's what I can say. So the plan is continuous, but it's about it's controlled. You update any changes that have been approved. But while with adaptive, it's actually the way of working. Okay, every time we get feedback, those short feedback loops, we adapt to what works and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Thank you.
You're
Right.
welcome.
Thank you so much, Robert, for this session today. And thanks to all the candidates that have attended the session. Wishing you all the best as you prepare to sit for your exams. Please continue interacting, engaging even in the WhatsApp groups, and feel free to reach out to Robert if you need to ask any questions following this session, and reach out to me if you need any assistance as well. I'll be able to direct you to the right place. So we've come to the end of the session today. Have a good evening, good morning where you are, and we'll meet again on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert.